Start? Okay, we'll start. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to do some talking and some working, where you get a little bit of practice to try some of these things. As I said, normally what I'm doing here is I'm squeezing 3 days into a very short period of time, because I heard you're all very, very smart people here, so you can learn it. Hopefully learn it all in a very short period of time. So, by the way, I do encourage, if you do have a question as we're going, that's okay. We can still answer the question. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 50 minutes to do some work. Then we'll take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do some more work for another 50 minutes after that. But don't be afraid to ask questions as we're going. We can stop and we can handle the questions. So I want to make sure you're comfortable with the journey we're going to go on. So let's get going now. The main thing I'm going to talk about here is why business architecture? And it's actually a really, really good question. Not only why is business architecture important, but why is it important to you? I really do think for many business analysts, the role of business architect is a place to go. It's a place to aim for. There are career paths to be. You can be a business analyst or senior business analyst, but business architect is more than senior business analyst, because the scope that you're going to look at is wider. You're going to look at more things, and it may not necessarily be a project by itself. It might be something where you should keep that knowledge current for your organizations all the way through. So I'm going to talk about that. Some of the main concepts or ideas behind it, an approach. There'll be a method in here you can follow step by step. And I mentioned in the last session, there's articles associated with each one of those. And some starting principles for you to start to think about. And you can ask yourself your question whether this is something for you, or whether you're happy doing what you're doing. So, is everybody happy? We'd like to go with more? I think that's the case. So this is just words, but business architecture is the structured description of the concepts and facts. What that means is there is a well-defined structure for business architecture. Even though it looks like the problem that you're dealing with is very big and very complicated, there is a structure that you can follow to help you deal with each part in an organized way. Concepts and facts, concept just the ideas, and the facts is how they tie together. How are business processes related to business capabilities, for example? We'll talk a bit about that. But so you can design, plan, analyze, do everything, both design the business as well as run the business based upon the structures of the architecture. And so the goal of the architecture, this is really quite important. The goal is to be able to identify non-redundant, meaning defined once and shared as much as possible, as opposed to having things defined 5 different ways by 5 different departments, and everybody not being able to communicate and connect up the dots. We have to connect them up. So non-redundant, reusable resources. So in my perfect world, every piece of functionality that we develop, every piece of capability we put in place is defined once and used in many cases. For example, something like credit check. When somebody is checking the credit of an individual, then that credit check really should only be one way to do it, with one set of resources that you call and you use over and over and over again. If you're a bank, it doesn't matter if you're dealing with loans or mortgages or credit cards. It doesn't matter. There should be one way of checking credit of the people who are applying, as opposed to many places today where each department does their own credit check. They figure it out themselves. One reusable service that we can use. So we can, of course, be connected to the business strategy. That's business strategy connection is important. One of the top things we're seeing now is that senior executives are frustrated because they develop a strategy and then it gets ignored. Or they say it 25 times, but it seems like no one's heard what they're saying. So treating strategy as something separate from architecture, I think, is a mistake. I think business architecture is part of strategy. And that will then also tell us what projects we can be doing and so on. So first little discussion just amongst yourselves is, of all the things that we could deal with in a business architecture, maybe just look at which 2 or 3 do you think are really, really important for your organization? There's a lot of things on this page, all the way from stakeholders outside, what do they expect, the business ecosystem, all the pressures that you're facing, the strategic intent. Intent means what is your vision, what are your goals, what are your objectives, what are the things you're aiming for. But strategic intent is not strategy. Strategic intent just says, what are we aiming to do or aiming to be at some point in the future. Then you have to figure out the strategy with regard to how you're going to do that. So one organization I've worked with a lot is a company called Mars. You know Mars, right? Chocolate bars, M&Ms, Snickers, products like that. And so what the Mars company did is they sent a challenge out to all the countries in the world to say, this was in 2008 or 2009, around that time period of time. They said, we want you to grow the business, which is revenue, 15% per year, compounded. That means at the end of 5 years, that means double your business. And by the way, we want a 20% return on assets, and we want 4% cash generated. So not just grow, but grow profitably and give us the cash to do what we need to do. Well, that was a very nice strategic intent, but it wasn't the strategy that they needed to execute. So then they asked the question, we work with them, in order to do that, what's going to be critical? By the way, I did not mention, the marketplace is naturally growing at 2% per year. They want 15% per year. I mean, so how are you going to possibly do that? So we said, well, what's the important strategy? And two major things came out. One of them is we have to get new products to bring to market. We cannot just sell our existing products. We have to have new products to fill out that gap. And the second one was we have to acquire competitors because we have to buy market share in order to get that done. So Mars bought Wrigley, the people who make gum and other sugar products. And so, but at the end of 5 years, they were successful. They actually did it, which is remarkable. But the strategy of new products and acquire competitors, that was the strategy. How are we going to realize that other number? So understanding that intention is really quite important. Other things in there too, we have things like business processes, business capabilities, information, having the right information, being able to make better decisions, and knowing what the business rules are. And then on top of that, we have things like the actual business transformation and the change priorities. So you could change a lot of things, but what are the ones that will make the biggest difference for you? So if I look at, as I said, when I look at the Mars scenario, the process around product development was absolutely critical because they had to get new products to market. But their other processes were not as important with regard to the strategy. So I have to decide what's priority and so on. We'll talk a little bit about all of those things today. So these are some of the things. What I want you to do is just take 3 minutes, 4 minutes, work within a small group of you and talk together. What do you think on here, 2 or 3 things which are really, really important for your business or your organization, okay? So now this is where you do some work. Okay. Join up in the teams and just do little small discussion groups if you can. You may have to move a little bit to be able to do that. Okay. Okay, I saw a lot of good discussions happening, and also I noticed that some of the things that are important to some organizations are very different than the ones to other organizations. So if you're in a highly competitive business where things are changing so much, some different things might be important. If you're in a business that's relatively stable, then other things might be important. Anybody want to just give me a couple of examples? I'll repeat it. Anyone? What were some of yours? Yeah, just. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Maxim, integrator at IT
Right.
company. So we have such a stable type of business, and for us, main points are business stability, continuous improvement, and stakeholder expectations. There are main points for our.
Because you're not in not as competitive.
Yes, because it's such a monopolization. So
Right.
we haven't any rat race.
The only thing you have to be concerned about is whether or not at some point you will no longer be a monopoly, whether there will be new people coming in to challenge you in the marketplace. Then it's really, really hard to change your thinking to be in a different type of model. Right? I just have a couple more. What about you guys? Did you have something? There you go. You volunteered now, I know that.
Okay, I will be a volunteer. We have chosen continuous improvement because our company is product-oriented and our market is very competitive.
Right.
The second one, the first one was stakeholder expectation. Okay, the second one, continuous improvement, because we have to improve functionality of our products.
So did you say continuous improvement was first and then it was
stakeholder,
second? So I think it must be very important if you do it twice.
Okay, yes, it's the double.
Yeah.
The second one, stakeholder expectation,
Right.
because we have to provide high quality product for our customers, our client. And the third one, strategic intent or strategic framing.
Right. So usually strategic framing takes all your strategy work and gets it focused on a few things so you can use it. That's why it's a star. We call it North Star.
Actually, we wanted to take all of them, but we have to choose.
I think that is a key message, that at some point you will have to deal with all of them, but quite often one or two are really causing you difficulty. So yes, thank you. Let's just do one more group and then we'll sort of go from there. We're in the business of choosing volunteers, even though that doesn't sound right.
Hello. Because we represent different companies in our group, we realize that in different companies it is different
different priorities.
Yes.
Yeah.
In my company, it is it's broker company, and it is stakeholder expectation, business ecosystem, and business results, of course.
Okay.
It's just money.
So the challenge with a lot of this is that if you really want the things on the right-hand side, if that's what you're aiming for, it's not going to happen by accident. You have to do the things more to the left in order to be able to do the things on the right. It's not going to occur all by itself. I cannot just have business sustainability if I have no baseline to understand what I've even got. So there's, of course, and these are all connected to each other some way as well. So that's the other part of the challenge. If I change the information model, I might change a lot of other things. So certainly if I change my priorities, it changes all the way through everything else. But it's always good to sort of ask the question where you are. We're going to come back to that information in a moment. So the next thing I want to talk about is something which my associates named after me. They called the Burlton hexagon, which was all about when you're dealing with organizing the company, you have to think about several things. And so first of all, in the center of that, it says business performance, which means measures. How will you measure what you're doing? Because one of the things that we find is so incredibly important, if you're discussing any of these issues with business management, if you can discuss performance, that's what's important to them. Then you can speak in their language. You can say, if I change this process model and we have a better set of processes end to end, then that will help us achieve something which is important to them. And so performance is always something we aim at. There's a circle I'm not going to take these in order, but there's a circle around the outside of that that says business processes. And as I said in the previous session, if you want to organize your work, the processes define what the work is. But to be successful in that, I have to have a lot of other issues. I have to know what my policies and business rules are, because my work is affected by my business rules. I have to know what people, what skills and competencies they need to have to be able to do that type of work. I have to know what software, what technology we're going to use, and that could be in applications or services, however you structure it. And it can also be about how do I get access to the data. It could be a matter of infrastructure. It's a very good question these days about whether you should do all the work yourself or whether you outsource some of it, whether you do it in Russia or whether you do it somewhere else. So outsourcing and just where you locate might be an important issue. It could be your organizational structure and so on. So there's a lot of things around the outside here that the business process has to interact with. And of course, there's the business information. But there's also another ring there. You notice the ring close to the center. It says culture, behavior. And so if you have your process designed perfectly, your information has good integrity, has good quality, and everything around the outside is perfect, it's the performance. And that's because the culture, your organization, the behavior of people is filtering all the good things as it comes into the center. So you have to deal with culture and behavior, the way people work. It's a very, very important issue. And so understanding how people behave and how the whole group behaves is going to be important. The point behind this chart is to have, so you have something to ask the questions. What about all these items? Because they have to come together. They have to come together because if any one of them fails, it's possible the whole thing could fail. For example, if my rules are really stupid, and we have a lot of stupid rules in companies, those rules, if you don't change them, could prevent you from having effective customer outcomes. Or maybe the rules are not important. It could be the technology. It could be anything around there that needs to be addressed. But you need to ask questions about all of these items to make sure you're focused on performance. Okay, so that's really what we're going to go for there. So I'm going to take, the picture we saw with all the different possible things that you talked about in your workshop. I'm going to bring them together in a slightly different way. So 4 major stages. The first one is strategic context. Do you know what your strategy is all about? Do you know the external pressures on the organization? Do you know what's important to your stakeholders? Do you know what your strategic intent is supposed to be? And what is the North Star? So the North Star is something we're going to put together as derive it out of our stakeholder requirements. If we know our stakeholders, we can basically narrow it down to really what's important. So every single meeting we go into, we bring out the North Star and we put it in the front of the room. Because if we agree to where we're going, or what we're trying to go towards at least, if we can agree to that, then every time we have discussions in every workshop or every presentation, we can come back and say, why do we recommend this? Because it's the best option according to the North Star. Now, I always also find that if you can get the executive to agree to the North Star, then when it comes time for a decision or a design, also like an investment decision, what should we invest in? You always come back to the North Star and say, this is why we recommend this. Or if you get arguments happening with people in the room about those decisions, you can come back and say, let's look at the North Star and figure out what's most important to us. If you've done that in advance, you have an easier time in all your workshops going forward. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then what we're going to look at is all the business design. This is where the structural part of the architecture really comes in. It says business information, business processes, business capabilities, and I'll talk about each one of those, and business performance. By the way, notice in every one of these sections, you're going to see this little circle going around. What that means is you cannot get one of them perfect before you start looking at the other ones. And as you're cycling around each one of them, you learn from that things about the others that you did not realize at the time. So this is very iterative. You could call it agile architecture if you wish, if you want to have a very popular name today. And so this will help us do that. Now, once we've done that, then I can then look at the change priorities. And the change priorities, the roadmap, the resources needed to do the work to make the change happen, and the actual transformation, the building of systems, the training of people, all those types of things can be put in place so that I can get continuous improvement, but also so I can get end-to-end management. And it's that challenge of, rather than just having departments functionally doing things and the work going all the way across them, which is of value to customers, I can make sure that someone is making sure all those pieces stay connected properly in the best possible way. So I want to do design cross-functionally. Do you have a question? Okay, we have a question. You have a microphone? Whereabouts are you? Oh, there we are. Okay, thanks. Thank you for asking, by the way.
Could you please give an example of performance measurement?
Performance measurement?
Yeah, just give different examples from different business domains.
So first of all, I would say that we sort of have four quadrants. The first one is effectiveness. Are we effective for our customers? So things like, if I were a hotel, I would want to know the return percentage of people who come back. That would be effective.
Some kind of a retention.
Sorry?
It's some kind of a retention, but
yeah, a retention would or if I was dealing with a company where the employees were very, very important, I would measure the retention rate of employees, the turnover rate of employees. I can also measure customer satisfaction. So there's a lot of things I can measure which are important about the customer or the other stakeholders. I can also measure efficiency. There's like how many transactions were we able to process per worker. So like I'm using my resources very, very well. It's another type of measure. So all things are on Lean and Six Sigma. Those types of measures would be.
So it could be different measurement from internal point of view and external.
And I can also measure things like quality. Which transactions passed were consistent with the service level agreement, or which transactions violated the regulatory rules. And I can also measure agility. How easy is it to make those changes? So measurement is a very, very tricky issue. But if you can talk to executives in measurement terms, those are terms that they're used to because they're responsible for measurements. Right? So it goes on their scorecards, yeah. And I will say a bit more about that as we go. But thank you for asking. What we're going to do right now is talk about the first part. Oh yeah, we have a question. Yes, sir.
What if the goals or the main target of stakeholders are conflict with the interests of clients?
They will. Sometimes they will.
So how to connect them?
Well,
in that case.
So really, we're talking about this part of the model. So if I find over here, I've got my stakeholders. I would even be starting to look at measurements even over here. And what you might find is that so I take the example of approving a mortgage. From a customer's point of view, I'll measure their satisfaction with that whole process. But from a regulatory point of view, I'll measure what percentage did we grant mortgages to within the countrywide guidelines for approval. So those things might be in conflict with each other. The customer wants to get approved, but the regulatory body does not want approvals which are risky. The owners may not want to have risky deals as well. But so what you have to do is, first of all, here, understand each one of those ideal measures would be, and then here, balance them somehow. That's an executive decision about how far do we want to go. But if you put the individual ones out and say, you can see there's conflicts here, then I have to have an executive decision about how we'll emphasize. I'll give you another example. We've done a lot of work in oil and gas development in Canada. We have I know Russia has a lot of oil and gas, Canada does too, except ours is very hard to get out of the ground. Ours is all in sand. And it's a very difficult, you have to basically mine the sand, take it to a factory, and pressure and squeeze out all the oil. So a company we work with there, we had two different executives. One executive had a program called Cost Reduction Program. Another executive had a program called Safety Program. So you start to see the problem. If you don't worry about the cost, then I can be very, very safe. But if I don't worry about the money, the price of oil affects my profitability. So both these programs are hitting at the same time. So what we had to do is come back to the executives and say, these are in conflict. How would you handle this scenario or that scenario, this other scenario? Where is your emphasis? So it's a question of leadership and a question of strategy.
You have to have a lot of people in the boards of directors which support stakeholders, employees, clients, government, and so on and so forth.
All the external stakeholders, yeah.
And in the case, we will try to be agile in the same time. So that is hard.
Yeah, it is hard. But here's the point. If you don't decide there, it's going to affect everything else that you do. Because when I come down to doing design, I cannot make a choice, because if I'm the architect and I've got all the different executives disagreeing, how can I possibly give them something that's going to satisfy their requirements? So I would rather have a big fight here than have a big fight down here. Because, and the reason I say that, I know I'm going to have a fight. Or maybe it's a friendly fight, but I'm going to have to address that issue. So I'd like to address it based upon the stakeholders and not just based upon each executive's personal wish. It's hard.
But also each executive will have his own or her own opinion as well.
That's right. But I want to hear that. I want to hear that opinion here in the light of we all agree that this is what's important. There has to be a balance, because all organizations have conflicts like that. But it makes it very hard for the architect to develop the right solutions if we don't have that discussion.
Yeah, because architect himself should report to somebody.
That's a good question. That's a very good question. So, and this is why I like the architect to report more to a more senior position. And personally, I prefer the business architect to be outside of IT. I prefer for them to report to the business executive and so on. Yeah, yeah. So I don't have a good answer for you, but it is in negotiations, put it that way. But sometimes a powerful executive will win. And if they do, we just have to work with that. We can't change what they do. Right?
And at the end of the day, stakeholders want money.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the ownership stakeholder was going to want some money. But we always have this challenge. I mean, I had a discussion in one company in financial services, and I talked to the person who's in charge of the risk department. And he said, the chief executive officer asked me to reduce the risk of loans. So he said, I can guarantee you, I can reduce the risk of loans to 0. No loans. What do you want to do? Right? So you have to. So what's an acceptable level of risk? So it forces these questions to be talked about across the whole thing. We are actually defining how the business operates, but we have to understand it back here in order to be able to do that. Okay.
And now I'm part of this project in my bank.
Okay. Well,
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So I understand.
So you understand the scenario.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So so again, I'm at the strategy piece right now. So if you really think about it, as an architect, the place to start is not inside; it's outside. So you say, who are all these people? What are the products and services we offer? What's important to them? But basically, I need to understand that first. So I'll just do a simple context diagram like this to basically say, this is what I send to customers. This is what I receive from customers. This is what I send to suppliers. This is what they provide back to me. This is a fairly easy exercise compared to some of the other ones. People typically know what it is that the organization does. However, in my experience, no single individual knows everything that happens. Different people are focusing on different things and have better knowledge. So putting this together into one picture is actually quite useful. And it can look like this. But we're not inside the box. I think we talked earlier, Irina talked about the inside the box a bit earlier today. In this particular case, we're looking, the box is just really is the scope of what you're going to look at. This could be the scope of one company. It could be the scope of multiple organizations working together. But you have to understand what is outside in terms of your control. We can't control what the customers like. We can try to understand it, but we can't force them. And those changes are happening in the marketplace. So this is a place to start. And I showed this one earlier as well, that really there are three things which are really quite important. What is it that we give people? What do we get from people? That's giving and getting. That's the last diagram I showed you. There's the value they get because they've got it. And so that's something that's really quite important. By the way, sometimes you have to be very innovative with regard to understanding the value so you can give them the right thing. I mean, a good illustration of that is nobody asked for an iPad. It wasn't like there's this big demand out there, we must have an iPad, we must have an iPad. So Apple decided they produce an iPad. They got very, very creative, and they said, what is the need? So the need was to be able to consume entertainment, to be able to consume and use easy reading on a single tablet. And so they saw the real need, and then they backed up and said, well, what can we do to satisfy that need? How about a tablet type of approach where I can carry 1,000 books with me and 300 movies on this small device. They saw the need that was not expressed yet. So that's the expected outcome. I can anticipate what that can be. That's where the innovation will happen. And also the experience. What was it like to have to work with you? It's interesting, coming back to performance measures, there's actually a new measure for customers these days. We start to look at the experience, and it's called customer effort score. And so you can answer the question, how easy were we to work with compared to what you expected? Were we as expected, easier, harder, much easier, much harder? And then so you start to measure experience based upon that. Now, I can measure the outcomes by asking questions like customer satisfaction, or another score called Net Promoter Score. And the Net Promoter Score is just a score that says, how likely are you to recommend us to your family and your friends? I'm sure you've all seen these scores now. So more and more we're getting those questions. How satisfied were you? Would you recommend us? And how easy were we to work with in a lot of the surveys that are coming around? So really we're going to try to do all of this. Now, in terms of the North Star, this is just what we were talking about. In terms of the North Star, if I understand those three aspects of value, I understand those three aspects from each one of the types of stakeholders, I can then come in and try to figure out my North Star. And so that North Star is just a consolidation and a balancing of all the things that are on the outside. So we have to have this activity taking place. And then what I can do is I can use the North Star, the one that's in the middle, I can use that to help me all the way through to make decisions. To help me decide if option A is better than option B. Well, it's not just better because I think so. It's better because it meets these specific criteria of value and measures that go along with it. So I can produce my measurement system right out of this. So as an architect, by the way, we're still outside. We're not really dealing with our own structures yet. We're dealing with the things we have to interact with. So that's going to be quite important to us. So the next one of these is to look at business information, because of course these days so much of what we do is about information, and a lot of organizations don't really have physical product; they just have information-based products. Even financial services is mostly about information, right? Not really things that you get. I get a credit card, but that just allows me to do things with information. So let's talk about that one. So there are going to be some key concepts. Concepts meaning what types of things do you have to know about? What types of things do you have to manage as a business? So in this case here, I've actually put them together into what we call a concept model, or you could call it a business object model, depending upon your background. But these are also the types of information I have to work with. So in this case here, the blue ones are all my relationships. I have to know about my business partners. I have to build relationships. I have to sign contracts. I have to monitor how well they're doing. And because they're going to be important people. I've also got the regulatory body. This is only a small piece of what the big model could look like. Regulatory body, and because they're going to give us regulations, I need to know about the regulation as well as the relationship with the regulatory body. How do we interact with them? And my consumer, or my customer, basically I have to know about who they are, and I have to know whether or not they have the ability to pay me. And there's a lot of things I need to know about that relationship. But they all tie into other things that are important. For example, an order. And you notice on here I have the boxes are the sets of things I must know about. The lines are the natural relationship. So here it says consumer, places, order. By the way, this is not a process. And it's just the natural relationship of the information you have to deal with. And so if I take the example and say, okay, what about, can a partner place an order? Not according to this. A partner cannot place an order. A partner would have to become a consumer in order to place the order. So I've got information about consumers, information about partners. Now, it might be the same organizations, but they're playing a different role. Does that make sense? They're playing a different role, okay? And so in this case, this should actually fall very naturally. I should be able to read this diagram and say, for example, regulator provides regulation. Of course they do. But the regulation constrains the financial service. That might be a list of all the services, but I'm not allowed to lend you money beyond a certain amount because I have regulations about that, and people will check up on us with regard to that regulation. I also have the order provides authorization for the financial transaction. So these just, what do we need to know about, and how is that connected to other things we need to know about? This is, for many of you, this is the beginning of your data architecture, beginning of your data models. But it's highly conceptual, and it's very business-oriented. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, sir. We have a question? You speak loud. Okay, that's good. Yeah. What is it by nature?
Okay, this concept, what is it by nature? Is it entities or some... So, I mean, do we need to link these entities and the concept to the previous one that we discussed, capabilities or processes or whatever?
What we're going to find here, like the reason this model is so important, because it's the foundation for an agreement on the words we use.
Yeah.
And quite often we get in trouble because different people understand words in a different way.
Like domain.
Like, sorry?
Like domain, domain model. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like this.
So, but this particular model can be, if you go down in terms of not just the conceptual view, but the more the logical and the physical view, you'll actually find your information, you'll find your data models, your information models, and these are just the business concepts. But at the same time, if you're building capabilities with the things we have to be able to do, you derive your capabilities exactly from this model.
Okay.
Okay. Your processes. So if I, for example, I'll answer this question and then we'll take a break, right? Then when we come back from break, we're going to do a workshop on this. Okay. So, but then if I look at the processes that take order, there's a whole bunch of processes that deal with take the order, review the order, approve the order, schedule the order, ship the order, get paid for the order. So it tells you what processes you're going to need to deal with those things. Also, your business rules are on the lines, but they're constraining. So for example, here, I got consumer places order. So here's the question. Can a consumer place an order if their bill is outstanding by more than 90 days? So the rule will constrain the line. These are just the basic foundational things. And it's, it's interesting. It's hard to do this, but it shouldn't be hard. You just got to pull yourself back and not get into the details and just say, what do we have to know about? What do we have to manage? And so that's really what we're going to try to do. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to put this up. When we come back, we'll do it. Okay? So this particular one says, okay, I want you to develop a concept model for a pub. Okay? You're allowed to have a pub. Whether you believe in drinking or not drinking, don't worry about that right now, okay? But we have a place where we can go. So I want you to find up to 5 business concepts, 5 things we have to know about in order to run this pub. And then I want you to define one term. Just when you define the term, you're allowed to go online and find a common definition. I don't want a special definition if a common definition will help you. And so, you know, focus on the things around the core of a pub, and some of the core relationships we need to have. But first of all, we're going to take a break. I'd like to do a 10-minute break if that's okay, because I have a lot of other things I want to get you through to try, if that's okay. All right? And so start thinking about the pub. I mean, I'm sure some of you were already thinking about the pub, but from a different point of view. Really, what we're trying to do is produce something simple. Only 5 boxes. Remember, there's boxes around relationships. You have customers. You might have other relationships you have to deal with, and also some of the other things you have to deal with. But in order to have a pub, there's a lot of things we have to know about. Otherwise, we can't run the pub. So, what is the core, the really essential things? But just give me 5 different things, and if you can connect them, and name what that is. So, on the line there's a verb which explains what's going on. Okay, so it says again simple things like consumer places order, orders provides authorization for the transaction. The financial service agreement is relevant for the financial service. So, just I want a very simple view of this. And when I said also define the one term, that means take any box and define what that word means. And you're allowed to go online on your phone to figure out what that might be. Okay? Let's take about maybe 10 minutes to do this exercise. And we will do another exercise today as well. Yeah, do it in your group. Because this is why I've given you a pub. Because it's something, it's not your own business. Yeah, that's the exercise. I just wanted to show you the other one because that's what we're trying to replicate, okay? So, 5 concepts and any lines that connect them and the nature of that line. I'm going to call time on this exercise. I think that the teams that went around and looked at, you're all getting the idea. And just a couple of lessons learned on this is that a characteristic of the concept is not a concept. So, for example, you say, we're delivering friendliness. Well, I cannot say, okay, here's your friendliness. Thank you very much. I hope you're happy with your friendliness. That's really nice. What am I really saying is, I'm saying that friendliness is a characteristic of our employees. So it's an attribute of the employee. It's not a thing all by itself. So there's a lot of words like that, which are more measures of things than they are things. Does that make sense? So when you've done all this, it should look really simple and straightforward and say, okay, of course that's what we have to work with. But doing this helps us get everybody with regard to scope, what we're dealing with. It also makes sure that we have the basis for communicating. It's really much more of a communication model. It will end up as being worked into a data model, and you can build capabilities around each one of these things. So I can basically then say things like, what is our order management capability? Are we good at it? Are we bad at it? Oh, I just got my friendliness back. You don't want to be friendly? All right. So, and so the thing is, there's also a whole set of capabilities about regulation management. How good am I at managing regulations, or services agreement management, and so on, and consumer relationship management. So every one of the blue boxes like that will typically have the word relationship with it for capability, but there'll also be processes as well, which we'll look at as well. Okay. So now I want to look at processes. We will do an exercise in here as well. And so if you sort of go back to the basic definition, the Business Process Manifesto lays out some of these terms as well. There is a Russian version of the Business Process Manifesto. If you go to bptrends.com, you can find the Russian version. Okay. The general idea here is that it's really simple. Inputs go to processes and you get outputs on the other side, but the inputs are based upon meeting the needs of some stakeholder, and on the other end of it, hopefully, we've delivered those needs. So if business process describes the work is in process and transformation, and the work must create value. This is really what we're looking at. It's not just input, process, output. It's very much connected to the stakeholders. So the high-level processes, the end-to-end processes, will connect the stakeholder right back to the stakeholder. So that's one of the ways we'll define value stream. It goes right back to the stakeholder again. Where, of course, inside each one of those, there's a series of sub-processes and other pieces. Keep breaking that into its details. So just a few terms then. A value chain is all the work to satisfy a market, a set of customers. A value stream also satisfies customer, but there's always a trigger. Something starts it. So somebody goes click on your website, and then you do all the work until you get to the point that you've satisfied the person who went click in the first place. End to end. So value streams are about the end to end. And I can measure the value stream from the point of view of satisfaction, cost to do it, errors made, and those things such as that. So I can actually measure the value stream in customer terms or stakeholder terms, because there's also value streams that go to regulatory bodies too. So they go end to end. Regulation comes out, and you have reporting that goes back. So it's just a specific trigger, and quite often we'll name a value stream a high-level process. There's two different camps on this. I'll show you that in just a moment as to how we want to deal with it. So if you want to look at the highest level of processes, this is what we're going to call a process architecture top level. And the top level in the middle has a number of different value chains almost, different markets, different sets of things you're doing. So if you, for example, in the middle, consider something like Michelin. Michelin, what do? They'll make and sell tires. They will also produce restaurant guides. But I think those are two very different value chains. Right? Does that make sense? I'm sure that people don't sit next to each other who are doing tire design, who are also figuring out what a good restaurant was and how many stars they give out. Right? It's a very, very different business. So, but in that business, if I'm that organization, I can have differences in the core of what we do. The core is always about the customers. Right? And then on the top of that, I can have all kinds of things we have to do to guide or govern or control the business, or almost like manage the business. So anywhere from develop strategic plans, mitigate risk, things like ensure regulatory compliance. Notice that the processes all have verbs. It's always an action on something. So it's verb, noun combination. Processes should not have, like in English anyway, I don't know what the equivalent is in Russian, should not have things like ing, like marketing, accounting. Those are static words. It should be, rather than saying marketing, you should say promote to market as opposed to marketing, or conduct market research. So it's very specific what you're trying to accomplish. Same thing on the bottom. These are enabling capabilities, I should say. And enabling capabilities are about giving you physical resources to do the work, whereas the core is really the work, the main work that we do as a business. So we separate these things out so we don't confuse things in the guiding and enabling as being our core business. Our core business is the middle. And everything we do in the bottom and everything we do at the top should be to make the core better, to make it run better. So, and meet all the requirements we have to meet along the way. So we can build at the top level of the architecture. Every one of these arrows or chevrons, every single one of them breaks down into more detail. So this is an example of something we might do. So on the left-hand side, I've got the customer's process. In the middle, I've got our process. And on the right-hand side is what we have accomplished, or the state that we have achieved on the right-hand side. Now, if you're going to digital, if you're digitalizing any of this, you need to really understand both the customer's process and your process. Because now you're giving, in many cases, the customer the opportunity to do their own work in a digital way and connect in with us. So it's a very good question of when we're doing this type of thing, whether or not the customer is becoming part of our process, or maybe we're becoming part of their process. But we're going back and forth. If you're developing an app for an iPhone or an Android device, the customer's activities will be done there, and they will connect up to ours, and we'll connect it all the way through. That's very much a digital type of solution. This is why we tend to look at both the customer's process and our own process, right? By the way, if this was a regulatory agency, we'd have the regulatory body process. So every relationship will have those two that have to work together. That way we can make sure we don't lose connection along the way. This is very much an end-to-end. So if I look at the top, I've all types of things I do to get the relationship going. Once I've got it approved, I go to the middle and I transact over and over and over and over again. This is the banking model. So once I've qualified the consumer as somebody who wants to work with us, then I can start to sign up services like credit cards and personal accounts and loans and other types of financial services. Then I can provide the consumer service. I can close their accounts when they want accounts closed. I can report to the consumer and basically prevent consumer losses. That's things like making sure there's no fraud and things like that. I have a little story with regard to that. It's a true story. When I tried to understand what that process is. I was with my wife in Paris, and I was working, and she was out doing whatever she was doing during the day. We went out for dinner. My phone rang, and I answered it, and it was from the credit card company. And they said, "We're just checking to make sure there's no fraud. Do you recognize these transactions?" And I went through and said, no. And I realized, oh, so I get to my phone, gave it to my wife. I said, "I think this is for you." And then I heard, yes, all the way through. So there were valid transactions. She was not going to tell me about it. She would have told me 3 weeks later when I said, "Oh, is that new?" She said, "Oh, no, I've had this for a long time." So, but that's what that process would be to handle that type of situation. And so here, at the top, I've got the setting up the relationship. In the middle, I've got transacting the relationship. And at the bottom, I've got the ongoing reevaluation of the relationship. So in this case here, I might decide that that particular customer is somebody I don't want to have anymore, so I will terminate the relationship, right? Or the customer may no longer need our services, so they might terminate the relationship. So this is an example of going inside one of those big boxes, one of those value chains. Okay? So, and ultimately, it's going to come out and look something like this. The lower level processes will start to fill up the box in the middle. So I'm adding layers to the process architecture. And this defines all the work we have to do. I can measure every single one of those, and every single one of those I can connect to a stakeholder at some point in the process. They'll be involved. But I'm going into more and more details as I go down. So, next little workshop. I would like you to figure out for the customer, the relationship with the customer, what are all the processes you have where you interact with them. So name the process. Now, at least take the one where people know who you are, and they maybe start it with they show up at the pub, and then all the way through to the time they leave the pub. What are the activities or the processes inside there from showing up to leaving? Okay? So just list them out in order. Please use verbs. Okay? Please use verbs and basically describe what they are. Okay? So that's the workshop. What I'm asking you to do is the equivalent of this. You already they already know who you are, and they arrive. So the event is going to be they have arrived. Now what? Now what do you do? What do you do to satisfy their expectations? Okay, again, the idea, I'm going to call the time on this. The idea behind this is to get you thinking. The important thing here is that, so let me just run through what I would think of. I would think of somebody shows up and they're standing in front of me at the front of the pub, right? And so they're going to say, oh, welcome to our pub. So I could call that greet the customer, welcome the customer. I could call it identify the customer. Different words for it, but it involves all of that stuff. I'm even going to ask the question, do you have a reservation? If there's tables, and we're going to be full, and if you don't have a reservation, perhaps I won't let you in. Next step, it might be to basically get you seated, or at least to give you a place to stand, or whatever it is, but to let you in. Then what's going to happen after that? Well, someone is going to place an order. So we'll do something like receive order. What will we then do? We'll then, what's the right word? We'll actually prepare the order. We will serve the order. We will, at some point in time, maybe that one repeats a few times, especially in a pub. Multiple orders over the evening. And at some point in time, I'm going to give you a bill. And after that, I'm going to receive payment. And then after that, I'm going to kick you out. But see what I'm saying? It's just the logic of the things that we're going to do. Processes are all about actions and delivering a result. And that result will then lead to another action, which gives you another result. And so it's just a natural cycle of things that take place. Your process model is going to be extremely important, along with your concept diagram. And as these guys were talking over here, all the things in your concept model will show up in your process model. If I look at that whole process, set of processes I just talked about, all of those are going to deal with customers, concept, product and service concept, order concept. There might be a payment concept. So they're going to put all those together, and all those concepts will be used in the process model, right? So, okay. Apparently, I'm a little tight for time, so I've got to have to keep moving here. So, so next one is going to be capability. Are you capable? So this is a bit academic, but there's a lot of discussion these days as to whether or not you should do your processes, or whether you should do your capabilities, or what combination of those two do you need. So what we've really discovered is the best way to look at this is at the top of all this, if you can get your value streams, which are really end-to-end, then from that you can figure out your sub-processes, and you can figure out the capabilities that are required. And if I have a capability view, I can say, well, what processes do those capabilities serve? So, for example, the order management capability is going to be used to deal with orders, of course. And if I go down the process side, I can say, what capabilities do I need for that to work? And so typically what happens is the capabilities will translate into things that you build. you build systems, you make people more capable or more competent. Processes are what we do, capabilities are what we build. And so the two will be connected to one another in a critical way. So if I've got an overall concept model, an overall capability model, so things such as I'm the bank, I'll have to be able to do product management, I'll have to be able to do cash management. So these are all things I need to be able to do, but I will use these in a number of different processes. Let me sort of go, of course, the capability can go into lower level details, just like the process can go into more detail as well. So this is an interesting chart because what it really shows is in the middle I've got some processes, in the bottom I've got some capabilities. So in this particular case here, a customer relationship management capability is used in a lot of different processes. You see the red line? It's used in a lot of different processes. And same thing under account maintenance. My account maintenance capability, which could be primarily a piece of technology, is going to be used in a bunch of different processes, I should say. So multiple places will call upon that capability, which could be software-centric, but it's not only software. It's also about people and other resources as well. So I'm going to show you what we do with this. After I talk about measurement, I forgot about measurement. I want to measure how effective is that process. I want to measure how efficient that process is. Effective is, does it work for the customer? Efficient is, do we use our resources well? Okay? And so then, of course, quality is how consistent are we? Is it reliable? And agility is how flexible is it going to be? So there are types of measures I can put against it. But processes are measurable. Capabilities aren't measurable in the same way that a process is. I can see for a process, how long does it take? How much does it cost? How satisfied are people? And for our pub, how many people come back? How many people are return visitors? That's a measure of our effectiveness, right? Because if we're good, they'll come back. If we're bad, they won't. So we can basically put these things together that way. So let's just talk a little bit then about prioritization. And then I'm going to get back to how the capabilities tie together. 2 points of view on this. One is from left to right, how good are we? And sorry, from left to right is how important is that process? So let's ask for your pub, how important is it for you to serve drinks? Right? Compared to wash the windows. See what I'm saying? Like some things are more important. We have to wash the windows, but that's not our core business. Unless we're in the window washing business, which we're not. We're in the pub right now. So some things will be more strategically important than others. We put those to the right-hand side. The ones which are like wash the windows will be to the left-hand side. So some things are more, just relatively speaking, I want to work on the ones that are important. That goes left to right. Then up and down is how broken is it. The stuff at the top really doesn't work well. But we really need to fix it. The stuff at the bottom, we're very good. So what does that mean? It means the top right-hand corner is where we want to focus because it's really important and it's broken. Whereas washing the windows, we may not be very good at it, so it might be broken, but it really doesn't matter. So just because it's poor quality and not working well does not mean we should invest there. I want to invest in the processes which have the highest importance and are also the ones which are not working so well. Because if I invest there, I'll get more money, more return on my investment. I'll be investing in the right things in the first place. So this is very much an architectural concept that ties to investment strategy. Now, if I look at another example of that, in the top right corner, I've got things which are both have to be world-class, and I really need to improve them a lot. So the 3 columns are important. World-class, which way are we looking at? Yes, world-class, best practice, and really just commodity. So best practice means you have to be as good as everybody else, but being better is not important. This is really, really important for us as business analysts. Sometimes we go out and ask people what they need inside the organization, and they'll give us all these requirements, but maybe those are too much for what is absolutely needed. right? So don't spend a lot of money making something the best when it's okay to be average. And it's really hard to get people in the business to understand that. You don't want to customize everything. But the stuff on the right-hand side, you have to be special. That's what makes you different than everybody else. That's really what your core business is all about. And by the way, you know what's down the middle? You know what that says? Do not customize SAP in order to deliver it. A lot of people will customize their enterprise resource planning software in order to be the best they can be. But the marketplace doesn't value it. So why are you spending all that money being special? Just do what the software does. On the right-hand side, you have to ask if that's where we are unique, and you cannot just buy that on a piece of software that comes with all the functionality in it, because then you'll be the same as everybody else. So this is actually a strategy question. Where do you want to emphasize? The up and down, people often focus on what's broken, but they don't focus on what's important. This leads to some very interesting discussions with the senior management. By the way, senior management loves these charts. Why? It's on one page, and they can spend 5 minutes of their attention on it, but that's about all they can spend time on anything. A bit of a joke, but but it's true. You need to get their attention on something really, really, really quick this way. So if I've got something in the top right corner, let's say I've got this process down the end, which is settled consumer complaints and claims. I can look down at the capabilities and say, which are the capabilities that are making me bad at this? In this case, it's credit score assessment. So I've got the right, one on the right is terrible, so I need to fix the credit score, how we do credit scores. That could mean a whole new credit scoring technology, or it could be training people better to be able to do it. But the problem is, as soon as I do that, and I look at this one on the bottom left, I have to ask the question: are there other processes? Are there other processes that are affected by this type of decision? So there are other processes here. So as an analyst, if you find a capability that's bad, you have to look at all the processes affected, and not just fix the one process. You make sure it still works for the other ones. So a good business architecture will tell you which processes are connected to which capabilities. By the way, I'm only dealing with two things here: processes and capabilities. There could be information, there could be business rules, there could be lots of other things that are affected. So a good business architecture will allow you to do all these types of things. If I come back to the hexagon, if I've got a capability that's broken, I can say, well, is it the policy? Is it the technology? What is it? So what about it do I need to fix? And I'll go after the ones which are in the red there too. So all this stuff really connects and allows you as an analyst to do that kind of stuff. So basically then, the business architecture, what's it all about? It's about scope, make sure it's clear. Make sure we understand the context, the stakeholders and so on. Make sure we don't build things into each other, we associate them. So we build a capability map, we build a process map, we build our business rules, and we say, this process needs these capabilities. This process implements these rules. But that's only done by connecting the dots up. If you build them into each other, you won't be able to change them easily. And that's going to be the challenge. Organizational structure is something we can fix along the way. And this is just a simplification of reality. And at this point, by the way, I really don't care how you draw your diagrams. I do when I get down to the more detailed level. And maybe I'll use BPMN or something like that. But BPMN is not for architecture. Why? One of the major reasons why is that it has roles, and it's got the association of things built into one another. And also it tends to put decisions into the flow model, which I'd like to keep the decisions separate. And so I want a consistent terminology, and this is, the bad news here is that unfortunately you will never get there. Right? You will never arrive. You need to be always arriving, getting there, because the world keeps changing, and you're going to have to keep this up to date. So for a lot of business analysts here, this will be your future. And this is much more strategic. And I want you to have a career path that can get you into these types of things. And I've only just barely scratched the surface on the issues. As I said, if you're interested, go to our website, pull down some articles. Okay? So, do I have time for a question, two questions? One question? Okay. A question. Who has a question? Anyone? Ah, over here. You can't win a T-shirt though. Okay.
You mentioned a KPI for measuring the agility, the flexibility.
Yeah.
On the other hand, one of the workshops, the second one, if I'm not mistaken, takes the customer, the bank, the loan, and it looks very, very, very heavy. And it feels like waterfall because you have to go through all those stages. So in one side, you'll have agility, you have personas, you have do the minimum, and on another side, you have these heavy looking processes. So how you put the balance, because might be hard.
Okay. The answer is simple, it's data. The answer is data, because if I cannot trace the data specifically from process to process to process, I cannot digitalize, because the data has to be defined once and used in many places and tracked all the way through. It's a very attractive just to do stories and run personas. Those are really helpful, but they're not good enough. I still have to build software which has integrity. The data is put in place once. I can trust that it's working all the way through. So at some point in time, someone is going to have to put this together and trace it all the way through and also to be able to measure how well we're doing and provide that measurement feedback back to the organization. So I think it's still important. I like all the user stories. I like the customer journeys. Those are all good things, but they're not a substitute for having a well-defined integrity on your actual models. So both, and you need both, in my opinion, right? Okay. So, all right, thank you very much. All right, everybody. Spasiba. Thank you.